Have a seat on your porcelain throne. You're listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have a familiar voice on the podcast who happens to be another living legend. I'm talking about two-time X Games Gold Medalist, Todd Richards. Todd's story is one of those that if I were to tell it fully, it would be way too long for this podcast. The dude has done so much in his life, and for the most part, it's all been pretty awesome. On the show, we're going to figure out how the nerdy Stranger Things Todd became one of the faces of snowboarding. We also talk about how a horrible arm injury created a new career behind the mic for Todd, and a whole lot more. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to tell somebody about the podcast. I don't care who it is, just tell someone. I also want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and shoot me an email if you have any questions or concerns. My email is mike@thepowellmovement, and I will get back to you. Finally, I need to thank my sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to a guy who does a lot of talking, Todd Richards. I guess I'll start it, man. You're a podcaster yourself. It sounds like you and Chris Coté have a show that comes out on Monday. It's The Mass. And tell me what your show's all about.
Well, in a nutshell, our show is pretty much loosely frameworked with action sports goings-on. But oftentimes that leads to crazy directions of movies and what's going on in the world and little idiosyncrasies that I have or that Chris has. It just goes in crazy directions.
Yeah, I would say you have a great background of snowboarding, skateboarding, all that kind of stuff, but I'd say there's a little bit of nerdiness to you too, between Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and all that shit. It comes out on the show. Oh,
yeah. Look, I was pretty much raised by George Lucas, like a lot of people that grew up in the 70s and 80s. George Lucas was, and Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was pretty much my life, and it never went away. I have this theory that there's a portion of your brain that just never, ever grows out of whatever you were into when you were a kid, and I just embrace it. That's pretty much who I am in a nutshell.
So it's all live long and prosper for you.
No, I wasn't a Star Trek guy.
I'm kidding.
But look, I didn't shy away from any sci-fi or any monster movie or, if there was big lizards in it, I was pretty down.
Okay. And that all starts for you in Massachusetts.
I was born in Worcester, right outside of Worcester, Mass, in a little town called Paxton. And where I grew up was pretty much as rural as you can get in Massachusetts. It was up in the country. There was a lot of open space, farmland, a lot of woods to go and play in. The neighborhoods were not really that dense. There was just a lot of open space. And you could go get lost in the woods and hike around and live the child fantasy that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, it really doesn't. You can't let kids just go. But growing up there, were you a New England sports fan?
I could give a shit less about hockey, football, baseball, basketball. I just didn't care. My parents and my relatives were so into it, I think it drove me away from it the same way that I hate lobster, because it was in my face all the time as a little kid, because it's like another New England staple. It's like Red Sox and lobster.
Right.
I hate both of those things.
And you're an only child growing up.
I am. Yep, I am.
Is that a weird thing when you look back on it? Was it you're always looking for someone to play with and your dad's your good buddy for a while or your mom's your good buddy for a while, but you get to a point in life where it's like, I just got to get out of the house and find friends?
Not really, because I didn't know any better. It wasn't like I was longing for something that other people had. I guess being an only child, it helps you develop a really great sense of imagination, and you can entertain yourself very easily. I think that's probably, in the long run, why I gravitated towards skating initially, was because it was something I could do by myself, and I could work on it by myself, and I didn't need a team. I didn't need to have anybody else except for like a skateboard and some dry asphalt. That was it. So I have 2 kids now, and I see how they interact on occasion, because right now I'm in a phase where my kids want to kill each other half the time.
Okay.
But, like when they're growing up, that you have a best friend, and then whatever happens in your teenage years, you kind of go apart, and then you kind of come back later on in life. I think that's really cool. I think it's really magical. I didn't have that. I don't know any better. And quite honestly, I wouldn't have become what I became in snowboarding or anything if it wasn't for me being an only child. I know that for a fact.
And it sounds like the crew that you were running around with back then was more like the Stranger Things kind of crew, into Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of shit.
Oh, yeah. Before skateboarding and punk rock came along, I didn't fit into a particular high school genre. I'm talking like freshman year, straight out of 8th grade. Like, what's cool in 8th grade does not fly in high school.
Right.
So I found a bunch of kids that were kind of still in that arrested development of childhood. And we just would play Dungeons and Dragons and go to the arcade. And maybe we weren't so focused on sneaking beers and trying to get laid. We weren't even there yet. I mean, we all were like stoked on girls, but girls wouldn't have anything to do with us. So they just kind of were a non-factor.
Yeah, I heard there was a funny story about you and girls and action figures that created a nickname for you.
That was actually September, October of my freshman year. I believe that Return of the Jedi came out in May of the previous year. So, like, I was still in Return of the Jedi fever, like Star Wars was life.
Right.
And my house backed up against the woods, and there was this big patch of land that I would always go and set up battles and would have forts. So I brought a whole bunch of my stuff out there into the woods, as I always did. And these two girls were cutting home through the woods. I was like mid whatever. There was some serious shit going down for the Ewoks in the woods. And these two girls just all of a sudden were just standing there. And I was like, oh, hey, how's it going? Trying to play it off like, oh, these aren't mine. I'm just like, the guy that owns these just kind of left. I don't know who left these here. So I didn't think really anything of it. I didn't really know them because they were older. They were probably like juniors. And lo and behold, the next morning on the bus, guess who's got a brand new nickname? Yeah, that kind of stuck for about 8 months.
Oh, that's not so bad. I thought it was something that stuck through high school. What was the nickname?
No. You know, I was really short, too. Like, I was a really, really tiny freshman. I didn't really hit my growth spurt till maybe my senior year. But I was like 4'7".
Huh.
Tiny human being. So to be like a tiny little nerd with a really terrible haircut, horrible fashion sense, and played with Star Wars figures and Dungeons and Dragons, like, that would be really cool now. Like, you'd be like a hipster. But back then, you were just setting yourself up for being tortured constantly.
Yeah, that's the shit that gets you locked in lockers.
Oh, yeah. And that is exactly what happened.
That happened to you?
Well, I got put in a locker. It was probably May of my freshman year. And there was this kid who had been giving me tons of shit in my social studies class. It was like relentless. And then finally, I said something to him, like something that would initiate some kind of conflict. I can't remember exactly what I said.
Sure.
I was really sick of getting picked on. It was to the point where it was just like straight torture every single day. So I decided I was going to I'll fight you. And there was only a couple places that people would fight in school. And one of them happened to be the hallway where the freshmen all have their lockers. And it was before school and all the freshmen are down there. And it's like, no one really goes down there except for the freshmen. And this kid, he came over and was like, well, I heard you talking shit. You want to fight me? And I'm like, yeah. My friends are like behind me, egging this thing on. And people that weren't really my friends, but were like in my circle, they just wanted to see carnage. And I clocked this kid. It was probably the only fight that I've ever really been in. So I hit the kid in the face. And then 2 seconds later, the bell rang and this teacher came up and broke it up. But the other kid got in trouble. I didn't get in trouble.
Sounds like you won at first.
Yeah. And I was riding pretty damn high going into my next period class.
Yeah.
So this was the period before lunch. And lunch was backed up right into gym class. Or gym was backed up to lunch or something like that. I forget how it was. But there was 2 or 3 gym classes that happened at the same time. And he was in one of the classes. And we all ended up sharing the locker room when you're changing to go back to class. And so that kid found me with a bunch of his oversized ogre friends. And they stuffed me in a locker. They were all like combination lockers. Stuffed me in a locker, and then they all went to lunch. And then everyone from the gym went to lunch.
Oh.
It was just like lunch period. So I'm stuck in a locker, and at first I was like, oh, ha, ha. And then pretty soon I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I'm stuck in a locker. So I began to kick the bottom of the locker. And eventually the bottom of the locker started to bend out. I was creating a bend in the metal so that I could like slide out of the locker.
Okay.
I'm making a lot of noise because I'm kicking this locker in a cement locker room. So it's just echoing off the walls. And
I would be freaking the fuck out.
I'm freaking out. I'm screaming, help. So finally, I kind of slide halfway out of this locker and kind of like get out. And the school nurse shows up. And it looked like I was breaking into the locker probably instead of like trying to get out of the locker.
Yeah.
So she grabbed me and dragged me down to the principal's office. And then lo and behold, the other kid gets dragged down there too. And we go into like the principal's office, and the principal goes, I don't know you, but I know you, and points at the other kid, and he tells me to get lost. So that was it. It was torture, and it was traumatizing, and I will never recover from that fully, like emotionally. But that's how it went down.
It sounds like your high school was the 80s movie where you must have hated high school.
Oh my God. But at the same time, it was dreamy. It was more towards the end of high school. Like, I found my peer group. I discovered skateboarding. I discovered punk rock, and like had a purpose. That's when it became amazing. Like, high school became raw because I didn't really go to class. Like, I just like went and skated and like kind of skirted through high school. And then it was like a John Hughes movie. But before that, it was just torture. Like, going to school was torture.
And that sucks. When you get into punk rock, I think your mom had a hair salon in your house.
Yes, she had a full-on hair salon. It was called Hair Unlimited. That was the name of the salon.
And were you able to have the coolest punk rock looks because your mom was a hairstylist?
It was not like she was offering to give me spiky hairdos. To be like a punk rock kid at that point in society was not really cool. It was like really frowned upon. It was a fully rebellious thing. So like, my mom wouldn't be like, oh, you want some Liberty spikes? Like kids you see nowadays at the mall. Like the jock kids that are named Kyle, and they go and they punch holes in drywall. Back then, you were a full outcast, and your family, they wouldn't just shake their head at you. They'd be like, quit fucking up. Like, you're a disappointment. So there wasn't a lot of embracing of the lifestyle that I was choosing to listen to freaking Black Flag and Suicidal Tendencies and Minor Threat and Play It Loud and go and steal chemicals out of my mom's cabinet and mix bleach and bleach my hair and just be weird.
And this is when skateboarding starts for you too, I would think, because it goes hand in hand with punk rock music.
Yeah, it did. It was like there was a couple kids that I went to school with. They were kind of like the older, cooler kids, and they listened to punk rock and they skateboarded, and they were kind of misfits too. And I kind of just fit in with them. So I became a misfit that was listening to punk rock and skateboarding by default. If I wanted to hang out with them, these are the things that I needed to do. That's how I found it.
And with Paxton, I don't know if it was a cool place or not to grow up, but the one cool thing of your childhood was there was a badass vert ramp in Paxton in the backyard, and you were kind of the groms that would hang out and session it when you had the balls.
Yeah, it was probably one of the first real ramps on the East Coast. Well, I should say in New England. And it was this guy, his name was Tom Putnam, and it was in the center of town. And these were older kids that had already graduated high school when I was a freshman.
Bad influences.
Yeah, like they were older and they were badass, like as far as I was concerned. And it was neat because of all the places that I could grow up and of all the influences that I could have, it just so happened that there was a vert ramp in my town at a time when there was nothing. You know, we were East Coast. There was no cement skate parks. There was no scene. And this guy had a vert ramp, and we were skating, but I wouldn't consider us skateboarders. It was merely just a transportation accessory at that point to listening to the music we were listening to, until we went to a contest that was at this guy Tom's house, and we saw what was possible. Everything changed that day. Everything changed.
And what kind of vert ramp is this? There's no Mace Night. I would think it's huge splinters and too much vert kind of ramp.
By today's standard, it's really small, but it was perfect. But it was 16 feet wide. It was plywood. It was vertical, though, so it was fast and had pool coping, and there was a channel in the middle of it. It was huge. It just seemed huge. It was probably 8.5-foot trannies with a foot of vert.
Okay.
Nothing
gargantuan by any means, but at that point in time, it might as well have been a mega ramp.
How long does it take you to have the balls to drop into something like that? Because I know the first time I stood on top of a vert ramp at like 12 years old, I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to do this. And today on a skateboard, I'm still that way. How about yourself? How long did it take you to drop in?
Well, it was funny because we would go there, but we couldn't skate when the big kids were there because we were all just faking from the flat bottom. You know, there was a couple of us that had learned how to drop in, but for the most part, the rest of the little misfit dweebs, we would all have to fakie from the flat bottom because we couldn't drop in. So we would only get limited time at that ramp. It was usually at the end of the session when everyone was tired, we would get a chance to like skate for like an hour before it was dark. So after a while, I kind of built up confidence to be able to link kick turns and get kind of high up on the ramp. And then at one point, that guy, Tom, who on that ramp was like, here's the ultimatum. You either need to drop in or roll in, or you guys aren't allowed to be here anymore. And it was like literally, okay, I'm looking at this thing. There's like a channel roll in, and I'm looking at the drop in. I'm like, whoa, the drop in looks gnarly, but maybe I could just roll down this thing here and I'll be fine. So I'm thinking rolling in is going to be easier.
Right.
Oh my God. So I got the balls up to roll in, and like everyone's there, like go, go, go. And I roll in, and I don't even remember. I just like woke up on the flat. But that was kind of towards the end. And then someone else built another smaller vert ramp after that. And I think I learned how to drop in on that or on this other kid's quarter pipe in his yard. So it was like after that, it happened pretty quickly.
Is skateboarding life for you at that point? I mean, you have school and all the other bullshit, but are you bringing a skateboard everywhere you go and skating as much as you can?
It was more transportation. Street skating hadn't really dawned on us yet. Like, it wasn't for another couple of years we would finally see the Bones Brigade video show, the very first Powell video, with Lance rolling off of his roof and kind of rolling down the street. And now we can see like little bunny hops. You know, you grab your board and you hop over things. It was like pre-ollie days, pre-street ollie.
So you're talking like 84, 85?
Probably 84, like 83, 84.
Okay.
Yeah, once we saw that movie, once we saw the Powell movie, because up until that point, we could do bonelesses and stuff in the street a little bit. Mainly it was running with your skateboard and jumping off of stuff.
Big acid drops and shit?
Yeah, like acid drops and like running up on a wall and jumping off of a wall and that kind of stuff. But more ramps started to pop up. We started to meet more kids from the local scene. And for a while, like we had an incredible ramp scene and skate scene in our little tri-town area. It's pretty insane.
Do you have people coming from all over to your town, so you're seeing some badass skaters as well?
Yeah. Junior and senior year, our friend Mike built the first real 10-foot transition vert ramp on the East Coast, or I should say New England again. So we would have all these pros come, like Fred Smith and a lot of these dudes, like Jake Phelps from Thrasher. All these guys would come and skate this ramp. So we were seeing the best of the best at this ramp for a while. It was pretty incredible.
And I would think with a lot of gnarly dudes coming to a ramp like that, I'm sure there's beer drinking, smoking, and all kinds of bad shit going on. Do you get involved with that at all?
At that point, I'm still a little dweeby kid. I was very much like Arrested Development. God, I can remember, I think it was my junior year, or maybe it was my senior year. But I remember drinking way too much Sun Country wine cooler and like barfing my guts out. Your body is just trying to eject everything that's gone in there for the past 6 months. And that was it for me as far as that goes. Like, I had no interest in it anymore after that.
Now it is time for me to take a quick sponsor break. And my first sponsor is Evo. And Evo is a store I've been shopping at since 2001. I've always gone there because the people who work there never act too cool. They're kind of the people that are stoked and genuinely want to help. They're like that in all of their stores. Denver, Portland, Whistler, and of course my Seattle store. Their website, evo.com, offers just as much information and all the brands, product, and service for your bike, skate, surf, camp, ski, or snowboard needs. They also offer free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and a no-hassle return policy. Evo was started by a good friend, professional skier Bryce Phillips, and they have supported me since day one. Please support them by buying everything you need for your adventures from Evo. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. And while we all know Stanley for creating that green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, They still do that, and a lot more these days. When my kid thinks of a Stanley, he's going to remember the beer pint that kept his dad's beer cold for 4 hours, or the classic legendary bottle that magically keeps hot chocolate hot for over 2 full days. But we should all be thinking about Stanley when we drink water. Their water bottles are the best in class, and they are the right choice for the environment. And now, you can save 30% on all products from Stanley when you head over to stanley-pmi.com, buy some stuff, and when you check out, enter the code POWEL, the number 30, and that's all one word, and you're done. Make a difference, save some money, and those are my sponsors, so now we will jump back into the podcast. We're talking skate, but snow comes into your world. I don't know if your parents are skiers or you have a ski background at all, but it sounds like you get a snowboard in 85 and it probably totally sucks and the experience is terrible, but it's your first time on a board.
The first snowboard that I got, it was another one of those things, like, was peer pressure. I had a friend, and the winters were just so horrendous in New England that you couldn't skate. And at that time, skate was life. You know, I was skating every single day, and that was my point of existence, is just skateboarding. I'd go skate before school, skate after school, skate during school. And then winter would come around, and it would be freezing cold, and there was just nothing to do once it snowed. You can only chip the ice off the ramp for so long. So we ended up seeing snowboarding in Thrasher.
Man, so many people saw those little ads, and that's kind of how it all started for them.
It really is. And, you know, those Burton ads, and then one of my friend Rob Levine, I always credit him with basically being the reason that I ever even snowboarded. He was an early adopter of snowboarding. For some reason, he got a snowboard before everyone else, like kind of even before we saw it in Thrasher. He was the one that kind of introduced our friend group to snowboarding. And then we all had to have snowboards. So my parents got me a Burton backhill. I think this is 83 going into 84. And it was basically a plank of wood that was, for the most part, unrideable unless there's 3 feet of POW. But, right. You know, we don't get that on the East Coast. And basically it sucked. Like, I hated it. And snowboarding for a long time in my high school years, and it wasn't until I went away to college, but snowboarding was a social thing. It was just something to do when I couldn't go skating. And then I went to school in the mountains, and that's when snowboarding kind of became something I liked a lot more and really had a desire to do every day instead of something with like some friends on the weekend.
Totally. At the end of high school, I think you end up with a college scholarship.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
How does that even happen? Because it doesn't sound like you're the dude that's really trying hard in high school and getting great grades.
Well, the funny thing is like I had no idea I was getting a scholarship. Like 100% oblivious to the fact that my mom, I should say, applied for this scholarship, this art scholarship thing. I had no idea. It's like graduation day and everyone's being seated, and the people that are getting scholarships are kind of sat in a different section so you can go up on stage or whatever and get your scholarship or whatever the hell it is. So I'm just like, why am I sitting in this section? Like, why am I not sitting with my bros? Like, this is really weird. I don't understand why I would be here. Am I like in trouble? Like, you know, is this the people that didn't actually graduate? But I had no idea. And ended up getting a scholarship to an art school, and it was for graphic design. That was one thing that I did really love in high school. I had a really good graphic design teacher. I took graphic arts for 2 years solid, like from September till June for 2 years. And it was great. It was all like silk screening and manual typesetting and like
all shit people don't do anymore.
Yeah, all the stuff people don't do anymore, but it was like the early psychology of color and why ads are laid out the way they are and why things appeal to you. And I liked that stuff. And I really liked doing the art part where you were silk screening and, you know, you could basically make your own posters and all that kind of fun stuff. So I would just do skateboard graphics and snowboard graphics and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I ended up getting a scholarship to this 2-year art program at a college in New Hampshire.
So you go to school, you find some friends there that skate, but I think that year's a big year because you finally get a board with metal edges, and I think that changes the whole perspective of what snowboarding can be for you.
Yeah, I basically got a Sims 1500 FE Pro.
I've got one sitting right next to me.
Oh, you're so stoked. Is it red or black?
So mine's black, but I took it to Max von Marbod because he's my snowboard nerd who tells me everything about anything. And I guess the one I have has a purple Pro model on the top sheet.
Oh, sick.
And it's got 3 grooves in the base. And Max said it was never a production model. And he said if he was to put a price on it, he would say priceless. And then he kept it in his office for like 4 years because he had to be near it.
That's insane. That's really cool. So I got one of those Sims boards and it changed everything. It turned and it had high backs. And if I wanted to go over there, I could go over there. It wasn't like on the back hill where I was trying to ride a skimboard down a hill.
Right.
There was actually like I could control it. So that kind of changed everything, and it made it so that now I could go and I could jump. And then jumping started. This was right around the same time as like the very first magazines started to come out. So it was International Snowboard Magazine was on newsprint, and then the first Transworld Snowboarding came out. The first Snowboarder magazine came out. This was all kind of like during the same time period. And that Juicy Fruit commercial came out where there was Craig and Burt Lamar. So there was like starting to be things that I could emulate, because up until that point, it was like I was trying to do skate tricks, which was basically just like ollieing off of stuff and trying to do a frontside grab. That was it. Or grab mute or grab backside. It was like, that was it. There was no tweaking. There was no boning any legs out. No one was going 360s or 180s. That stuff just didn't exist.
Well, people are still figuring out the sport and what was possible on a snowboard.
Exactly. The sport itself was in such infancy that there were a handful of people that were making a difference. It was like Kidwell, and it was like Craig and Burt Lamar, and those people that really turned the corner and made it so that it really was a lot more like skating. Initially, what really stoked me on snowboarding was there's 2 pictures. One was a picture of Steve Caballero on an old Lonnie Toft classic photo. I think it's a Bud Fawcett photo of Cab on a Lonnie Toft board, kind of ollieing off the side of like a shack at Soda Springs. He's probably not even in control. He's probably going to eat shit. But it was just the fact that it was Steve Caballero. And then there was a cover of Thrasher with Rob Roskop on the cover, or it's Bryce Knights on the cover, on a snowboard, on a Terry Kidwell board. And so we started to see more skaters, like, here's your favorite pro skaters, they snowboard. So that really changed things for me, and that really made me want to get good, because these guys did it, and I wanted to do everything. I mean, pros were gods back then.
Do you have a pass? Are you going up every day after school?
No, the deal was I decided to apply to become a snowboard instructor, because if you were a snowboard instructor, you got a free season's pass. And season's passes were pretty damn expensive back then. Like, they're cheaper now than they were then, all things considered, with the inflation of money and stuff like that.
Thank you, Vail.
Yeah, exactly. So I got this job being a snowboard instructor at Gunstock Ski Area. And with that job, like, the other ski areas around there would extend courtesy. So if you wanted lift tickets at Loon or like these other places that were near there, you would have the extended courtesy because you were the ski instructor at a different resort. So yeah, I just started teaching people how to snowboard. It wasn't many people were there to take lessons. The equipment was horrible for them to learn on. And for the most part, it was just me riding around the hill, free season's pass. And if someone wanted a lesson, I would show up and teach them.
And how long from you being an instructor to you getting a sponsorship from one of the most influential brands in the history of snowboarding, Funky Snowboards?
I was a snowboard instructor for about a year, or maybe half a year. And then there was a couple little contests that kind of happened, these New England Cup contests. And one of them happened to be at the ski area that I was a snowboard instructor at, but it was a slalom. There wasn't a freestyle at this point. It was just all racing gates.
And everybody did everything back then, I would think.
Yeah, everyone had to do everything, but there wasn't really everything to do. Like, this is before Tenny Mountain Halfpipe Jam. Probably 2 months before that Tenny contest. So the rep for Funky Snowboards was at the race that was at my local ski area. At that point, I didn't really care about racing gates. Like, I wasn't good at it. So I just was jumping. I was just jumping off the side hits on the mountain, or like the hits next to like the lift towers, and trying to do 360s and whatever I saw in those videos, the early Sims videos or anything I could get my hands on. That's what I was trying to do. So he saw me, and Funky didn't have anybody at that point. And, I was an instructor. So he's like, how about I give you a board? And I was like, okay, great, cool. So apparently I was riding for Funky Snowboards after that. So Yeah, that was that. But those boards were horrible. They were absolute piles of garbage. Very, very bad snowboards.
That was very short-lived. It's just funny
Yeah.
that there's a brand called Funky Snowboards and you were on them.
It was hilarious. The crazy thing is I ended up getting a photo at the second halfpipe that the East Coast had ever seen at Neshoba Valley outside of Boston. Trevor Graves shot a photo of me doing like a backside air, kind of like a mule kick method on this Funky snowboard. And I had posted it on my Instagram a couple of years ago. And then Funky Snowboards apparently is on the comeback now in Europe. And so I get this call, or I should say a DM, and they're like, hey, can we use this photo? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. It's pretty funny that photo has gotten some circulation again, like all these years later. But it was literally, I only rode Funky snowboards for like a week. And then after that, I went back to riding Sims boards because they sucked. Yeah, then I started riding for Sims pretty much right after that, after the US Open in Vermont.
Yeah, well, I would say Funky. I can see how a name like that can come back in Europe because they have all kinds of weird names, and Funky sounds like it's super cool over there.
Yeah, totally. It's just bizarre enough for them to be really into.
So at that Neshoba contest, you took fourth. I think Brushie wins it.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much through the beginning of your career, I mean, Brushie is probably at everything that you go to and is on the podium everywhere you go. But it's the full contest circuit after that, I think, for you. The East Coast Series or whatever it is.
Yeah, the New England Cup. I mean, at this point, you got to understand that Brushie was bigger than life. He was bigger than all of us. He was riding with Craig Kelly. He was so far talent level beyond all of us. There wasn't even a comparison to be made. Brushie was, by all intent and purpose, was a god.
Yeah.
He had transcended to a pro, and that was like, holy shit, Jeff's pro. So all the rest of us were kind of left behind. All these kids that I had met on these contest circuits, and we were left behind doing the New England Cup circuit while Jeff went off and did the contests in Europe, and he was just gone. Jeff was gone on Burton Tour. So we would stick around and do these New England Cup contests. These were some of the very first pipes that the East Coast ever had, and there was an overall title, and everyone had to do everything, but luckily there was like an overall freestyle title too, like a pipe thing, and I think I won that, or won a couple contests one year, and then won the overall title for half-pipe champion the next year. And it's kind of like where it took off. New England Cup Series is where my career really started.
And how do you end up getting sponsored by Sims? Because that's one of those brands that everybody wants to be on at that point. And for you, a New England kid, I mean, I'm sure Burton is probably hearing your name, and they're like, hey, we should talk to this Todd kid, but you're on Sims. How does that happen?
Burton didn't talk to me. I think Sims, because Sims was a skate company, and I skated. I mean, I still was trying to pursue some dream of becoming like a pro skater at that point. It was like I was kind of falling into snowboarding because I could win $500 a weekend or $200 a weekend. And, at that point in time, that's a lot of money. So Sims spoke to me because they were a skate brand, and Tom Sims was a skater, and Chris Roach skated, and Tucker Franzen skated, and like all these guys that I really looked up to were all skaters. So I think Sims saw that too, that they wanted to have a rider on the East Coast, especially an East Coaster that focused on freestyle, because up until that point, everyone from the East Coast, with the exception of Brush, was a racer.
Yeah.
So they wanted somebody else, and I guess I fit the bill. I was a skater, and I rode halfpipe, and I was just different. So Trevor Graves, the photographer, was a real instrumental part in making that happen for me. He introduced me to the right people and basically helped me to get on Sims in the early days.
And what is the feeling when you get your first box or boxes from Sims? Because I can imagine a kid who's always got dreams of being a pro skater. You're always wanting that big box of wheels coming to your house, but it happens in snowboarding, and they just send you a shitload of stuff. And is that when you realize, hey, wait, there might be a future here?
It was crazy. Even still, when I get boxes of stuff from people, it's like the most exciting thing ever.
But the first time?
Yeah, the first time was pretty insane, because they sent you this welcome to the team letter that was signed by the people upstairs, and like, welcome to the Sims team. Let us know what you want. And they sent you this form, and everything was mailed at that point.
Yeah.
So they would send you a form in like September. You'd fill it out, and then you'd get your boards in like October or November, and your outfit and your boots and your bindings and everything. And I just remember getting like I think it was like 3 or 4 boxes showed up at the house. One box had 3 pairs of bindings, and the next box had like a bunch of clothes, and the next box had the 3 snowboards that I needed for the season. And it was a lot of stuff. It was a full like Christmas freak out.
Your folks pretty proud of you at this point when these boxes show up and they're like, holy crap, something's happening.
Kind of, like they were really excited, but at this point, snowboarding wasn't going to be a career choice. It was just kind of something that was happening. And I think my family was kind of excited that I was excited. They were still like, okay, well, that's all neat and all, but like, what are you going to do for work? So I was working at a ski shop while I was sponsored by Sam's. I wouldn't consider myself pro at this point, but by the standards, I was entering pro contests. But pro at that point was if you were over 18, you were in the men's pro division. So I guess I was pro, but there was no fanfare. It wasn't like it is now where you get like a party and they turn you pro. Like it wasn't like that. I was just like, yeah, I guess you're pro.
Well, I always just thought that is the weirdest thing ever, where when it's time to be pro, they turn you pro.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an earned thing of your body of work up until then, but it's just weird that someone can say on Tuesday you're an AM, but Friday you're pro.
Yeah. I always thought like from the skate contest world, it was like you were pro when you got a pro model or you entered the pro division and you did well in that. And I think that the very first contest that I went to and did really well, like in that case, there was this contest called the Vision Pro in the Snow, and it was at Squaw. And at this point, I had some photo incentives and some victory incentives owed to me by Sims. And Sims said, hey, in lieu of these victory incentives, how about we put you up at Squaw Valley for the Vision Pro in the Snow, and you can come out here and enter. And I was like, oh, okay. Didn't really think anything of it. And went out there and did surprisingly good and got like a bunch of photos, and all of a sudden was like a name. People knew who I was, and there was some excitement.
I mean, at this point, I don't think you've traveled much in your life until your first couple trips with Sims, like you'd been on a plane once or something like that.
No, maybe twice. I'd gone to Florida once with my family when I was really little, and then I'd gone to Aspen once when I was also really little. But it had been probably like 10 years since I'd been on an airplane, at least.
And once that first trip happens for Sims, I don't know if it was that Tahoe one or not, but...
Yeah, it's that Tahoe one. Yep.
And then from there, a lot of the dudes that you're going to meet up with are the dudes that bring skate style to snowboarding, which is pretty cool because that's where you're going with it, it seems like, as well.
Yep, it was.
But from there, it's like you're on a fucking plane for the next 30 years.
It pretty much was. There's 100%, you can draw a line from where it all started, and it really was the Vision Pro in the Snow. That was the first one. That season in particular, I didn't like win or anything, or I think I made the final. I didn't do particularly good in the final, considering I probably got like 8th or something like that. But at that point, Sims was stoked because they had another person that could compete and do well. And then they were just like, okay, we're just going to send this guy to where all the halfpipe contests are. So it was like literally after that, Vision Pro in the Snow, then it was like, okay, you're going to Lake Louise, and then you're going to Breckenridge, and then you're going to Copper Mountain. It was just like boom, 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 boom. I was everywhere, like freaking everywhere that season. It went from like 0 to 100. It was crazy.
Sims steps up and sends you to the U.S. Open in like 1990.
Yeah.
At that point, the U.S. Open, it's on the East Coast, and it is the biggest thing in snowboarding, I think. Is there anything bigger?
No, that was it. The U.S. Open was the pinnacle contest, and as it stayed reigning for years and years and years after that. So it was my backyard. It was where I predominantly rode. Like when I wasn't traveling, I was driving from Massachusetts to Stratton, sometimes 3-4 times a week, 2 hours up, 2 hours back. And it was nothing for me to drive to Stratton. So to have that contest there, I ended up getting 4th. It was a huge deal for me.
I think that's the first time your folks are actually able to see you compete in a big venue like that.
It was. And back then, the U.S. Open was a freaking zoo, too. Like, even in the early days, there were still thousands of people there watching.
It's like 30 deep looking at the pipe, it looked like on each side.
Yeah, it was crazy. And it was really cool. And my dad got to see me compete because shortly thereafter, my father passed away, like probably within the next 4 weeks after that.
Well, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. But it was really cool to have them actually see it go down, because up until that point, it was just kind of like, oh, he's doing the snowboard thing again. But then they actually saw the amount of people screaming, and when you drop in, and there's the cheers for the names when they drop in, it was a big deal. It made sense at that point.
Now it is time for my final set of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Spy Optic. Spy has spent the past 25 years innovating the sunglass game, but more importantly, they have spent 25 years making you look good. To celebrate this 25th anniversary, Spy is re-releasing the MC3, an ode to Jeremy McGrath's original MC sunglass. The new Dirty Mo 2 is a sick update to Dale Jr.'s original Dirty Mo, and the Scoop 2 celebrates Spy's OG Scoop sunglasses, which started it all. If you wear sunglasses and listen to this podcast, it's time to support me, save some money, and make yourself look good. What I want you to do is head on over to spyoptic.com, pick out some sunglasses, head on over to checkout, and you are going to save 20% by entering the code POWEL20, that's all one word and the number 20, and you'll save 20% off. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006. But over the years, and even before they sponsored my podcast, they've been one of my favorite beer brands because they do so much for action sports. They're the first beer to produce their own ski and snowboard movie. They support a team of A-list athletes. They throw an incredible series of events with their Hella Big Air. And they have signature beers that donate to important causes like Protect Our Winners. If all of that isn't cool enough, the people that work at 10 Barrel, they're all skiers, snowboarders, and bikers. You know, people that like to drink beer outside. Next time you're at the store, please buy some 10 Barrel and support the brand that really makes a difference in the sports we love. To find out more about the beer, the pubs, and everything 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you lose your dad that early in your career, It's got to crush you for, you probably still think about it. What am I talking about? But does it derail anything in the beginning? Do you go into a bad place for a while, or are you able to power through it?
I went into a weird place. It was really hard to describe. Being an only child, and I was kind of a latchkey kid. Both my parents worked, so I was on my own to fend for myself, which was great. As a young kid who just wanted to go skateboarding and not have any grown-ups in his hair, being a latchkey kid was amazing. So the relationship that I had with my dad wasn't super strong. He wasn't really in my life. He kind of thought that the whole skateboarding thing and where I was and what I was doing wasn't cutting it. So when my dad passed away, it was weird. It's always weird to lose a parent. It was hard to watch my mom go through that.
Yeah.
It's something that I'm still coming to terms with. There's a lot of things that you don't realize that have been affected the way that you deal with things in life that go back to one moment. You know, who I am now, some of my idiosyncrasies and my quirks go back to losing my dad and not dealing with emotions about that.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't hold me back. I was more weirded out how people treated me. You know, it's like you don't know what to say to someone when they lose a parent or they lose someone close to them. It's this weird, awkward dance where you don't know what to say and they feel bad for you because you don't know what to say. And it's like this round and round of who's feeling more awkward in this situation. So that was a thing that I had to deal with. And it was almost like snowboarding and skating were my escape from that. So it actually drove me harder. It was a lot to like process for my mom because she went from having a husband and now she's got her son who's leaving the nest.
Yeah.
And so she's got to come to terms with being by herself. There was a lot for her to handle. And I was chock full of teenage angst. So I probably wasn't the nicest person I could have been. It was weird. And it was a motivator in a lot of ways.
And I'll say your mom does the coolest thing that any parent can do for a kid who's got a dream. And especially you've come from a big loss and you're thinking about going to Colorado and she decides she's going to make that opportunity happen for you. I think she buys you a car, gives you some cash, and is like, let's make this happen.
Yeah. She was like, if it's going to happen, it needs to happen right now. And she did what she could. There was some money that my dad had left me, and she gave me access to that and got a car for me and helped me on my way. That's where it started, you know, my moving out west. Because at that point in my life, I just wanted to get west of New England. That was the West Coast. Like if I can make it past Philadelphia, if I can make it past Wisconsin, it was just getting further and further towards the West Coast. That was my goal.
And you end up landing in Breck, and that's really the first resort in Colorado. I feel like that's really embracing snowboarding, so you're going to the right place. Who are you riding with, or who do you find that first year?
When I initially moved to Colorado, I wasn't really riding Breck. I was living in Boulder, and I would drive to Vail. Vail was where I really started to ride in Copper Mountain. This is the time when like the Joyride crew was there, and there's all these people like Jay Isaacs, and I was predominantly riding with like Adam Merriman, Jay Isaacs, Zach Bingham. That was basically the crew. We were like this crew from Vail, and we met Whitey, and we were riding with like J2 and anyone that was living in Vail. Stevie Alters at that point. Like this may be a little bit further in the timeline, but for the most part in the beginning, it was like Adam Merriman and that crew from Vail.
The terrain and riding powder, does that create any challenges for you because you're coming from the East Coast?
Not really. I mean, to ride powder well is difficult, to land and pow off of like jumps, but to have access to like softer snow is amazing. It's an ego boost that you can throw yourself upside down and try crazy stuff. So going from East Coast hardpack to West Coast hardpack, they're two totally different things. So it was like soft landings everywhere. It didn't even matter if it was the iciest day ever at Vail. It was nothing compared to what I grew up riding.
If you can ride well on the East Coast, it's going to be a lot easier when you get to the West Coast once you figure out your powder landings.
Exactly.
You're still competing when you're in Colorado, and that's going to ramp up for you. But a big thing that happens at this time in your career is you end up leaving Sims, and it seems like a lot of the infrastructure of Sims, maybe the team manager and some people involved with the brand, head on over to Morrow, and it's got to be a huge leap of faith for you leaving a brand like Sims, who's got the skate thing that you need, as well as Terry Kidwell and a whole bunch of cool shit going on with the brand. Why do you end up leaving?
Well, at that point, Sims was imploding. There was a big hoopla with the company Vision that owned Vision Streetwear and Vision Skateboards. They owned Sims, and Brad Dorfman owned Vision, and Brad Dorfman owned Sims at that point. And then Sims decided that they were going to break away from Vision, and there was all this back and forth. And at that point, the entire Sims marketing department decided they were going to leave and start a new snowboard company, and they brought along a couple of us with them. And it was myself, Tucker Franzen from Sims. They grabbed Shannon Dunn. Rob Morrow was the catalyst for it. And then also Noah Brandon, who left Burton to come on board at Morrow. So it was like a great crew right away. It wasn't a hard decision for me at all. I was like, oh, Brad and Mickey are going to start Morrow? Okay, I'm going with you guys. That's how easy it was.
Who else is paying you at this point? Because you get on Morrow, you're like one of the first athletes on Gotcha.
Yeah, I was definitely the first snowboarder on Gotcha for sure. And then Exile Sunglasses, which was like a crappy sunglass company, but all the cool dudes were wearing them. I think Palmer and Roach and my Tahoe bros were riding for them. So I was totally down for whatever they were doing. So I rode for them too.
And how much money are you able to make in like the peak of your career? I mean, I ask everybody about money, and I know we're not at the peak of your career yet, but is it like where you can make $500,000 being a snowboarder in the heyday?
At the most, I was probably making like $2,000 a month. At the very most.
That's not in the peak of your career.
This is like in the very beginning. Did you ask me what was I making?
I was just jumping to the peak because I don't want to talk about money twice, like later too. So
yeah.
I figured I'd just ask you when you're at the peak of your career. So you just mentioned you can make about $2,000 a month in the beginning.
In the beginning, and then in like a not very long period of time, from 1990 to 1998, I went from making $2,000 a month to making like, I mean, shit. I was making like over $300,000 a year for like years.
That's insane and awesome.
It's crazy. I think about that now, and it's still like, whoa, that's like a really fucking big number back then. I mean, it was signing $1 million contracts for 3 years. And to have $1 million contract in 1990s was unheard of. Maybe like 2 other people had ever done that. So it was nutty.
You're crushing it on the contest run at this time. And I'll only bring up the big ones from back in the day. Mm-hmm. When you go to the U.S. Open in 94, that has to be one of the biggest wins of your career because you win the U.S. Open. But my question here is, you're in this huge contest at the U.S. Open in 94, and the biggest competition in the world for you at that point, I think, would be Terje.
Yeah.
He is not in that contest. You win it. Does that matter at all to you?
No. I was like, thank God, just one less person that I have to try to compete against. I wasn't concerned about who was there and trying to prove myself. I was just trying to be the best I could be on any given day. It didn't matter who was there. You know, if Terje is there, cool, I'll try to be the best. If he's not there, cool, I'm still going to try to be the best. It wasn't like I was bummed that I couldn't take down such and such a person, you know?
But did it ever get old going to contests and being number 2 or 3 on the podium and looking up at him being like, man, he's like a god?
Yeah, I mean, for a while, it was really hard to go to contests and end up being perpetually 4th, almost making it onto the podium. So I won my first event, and then it was like after that, it became like easier to win. I don't know what the psychology is behind that. It's like I almost let myself believe I could win after that. It became easier to tap into the best part of me. But Terje and I had shared podiums before, but I never thought that it would ever be possible to kind of beat him, because at that point, he was beyond legendary, even back then. It was really hard to beat Terje.
Yeah, he seemed like he was 2 feet further out of the pipe than everybody else and doing just crazy tricks.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the 97 World Championships that I just had Eye of the Tiger. I could match him for what he was doing. I had maybe more technical back-to-back lines than he did in the pipe. It wasn't such a stretch to think that I was competing on the same level as he was.
Yeah, you definitely were. Video part-wise, we're not going to talk about any of those, but you're in the early fall line film stuff. You filmed with Mac Dog and Robot Food, so you're one of those dudes that was able to do it all. But at that point in your life, how many days are you getting to ride for yourself? Because I would think everything's for a camera and everything's for a contest. And do you get any time to ride for Todd?
In between contests, I would go back to Breckenridge and hike the pipe, because that's really all I wanted to do. And yeah, I was competing in pipe, but at the same time, it was all I wanted to do. I wanted to ride a freshly cut half pipe and try to do weird lines that wouldn't score well in contests, but just to see if I could do them. My whole progression at that point was just trying to make it more and more like skating. This is before I was spinning 900s or anything like that. This was just trying to make really complicated lines in the half pipe. And we were filming a lot and we were doing contests a lot, but it was all the same. It was all fun. Like you could go and just ride and inadvertently have a snowboard part come out that year because you happen to be riding with a cinematographer or someone with a video camera.
So would you say that snowboarding's gotten a lot more serious now?
Maybe it's a little bit less serious now, like where you go to a ski area and the photographer or the guy with the video camera says, oh, that's not big enough. We can't film here, or we can't film on the resort. Unless we've taken 6 hours to build a freaking house out of snow blocks in the backcountry, it's not worth shooting. And that's how it was for a really long time. Then no one wanted to shoot park. It became more of like this adventure. You've got to go in the backcountry or you got to go off some crazy cliff or something to make it worth filming. But until very recently, it was like that. But now it's kind of back into like whatever goes. If it looks like it's fun and relatable, it's probably going to be more popular.
Well, people are going for attainable snowboarding instead of gnarly snowboarding these days.
Exactly. The pendulum swings both ways. When I was doing half pipe stuff all the time, people were like, okay, well, half pipe's boring. We need to go in the backcountry. And then now it's like, okay, well, no one can afford to go in the backcountry. So we got to bring it to the resorts because none of these companies have enough money to pay for heli time. There's no snowboarders these days that have a travel budget that can really afford you to do 3 or 4 days of heli time and then expect to do anything else for your season.
3 or 4 days of heli time, what are they looking at? Like $30K on a trip like that?
Yeah, and that's a full travel budget these days.
Yeah. Speaking of the business of things, in 95, things with the industry are starting to change, and you see that firsthand with Morrow.
Yep.
Rob leaves the brand. He's replaced by a suit, I would think, who worked for Scott or Schwinn. I don't know if he's a suit or not. But are you and the other riders and everybody in the company freaking out at that point?
Not really. I was kind of like bummed when Morrow went public. At first, it brought a whole bunch of money in, and then a lot of us got paid. But then it turned out that now we are slaves to the market.
It goes against everything your punk rock ethos stands for, I would think.
Totally. But also at this point, I'm like, I want to get fucking paid.
Yeah.
You know, the money's good. I don't want the money to go anywhere. So, yeah, it was a bummer. It was a bummer to see Rob go. And then K2 bought Morrow, and that did really good things to the brand. That was an awesome time for Morrow snowboards because the boards got really good and they became wood core at that point. Things changed for the better.
Until they died.
Yeah, until Morrow was basically just turned into a nothing brand by K2.
But I would think that the corporate guys who are running the show, they must be salivating over a guy like you because At this time, the X Games are about to launch, and they know that's a ton of free advertising. People are talking about the Olympics, and you also do the video stuff. So they're like, we got this core guy that might make the Olympic team. And when you're negotiating your deals, do you realize the increased exposure that you're about to have? And do you realize that makes you worth a lot more?
Well, they did. At that point, this was probably the fall of 97 going into 98. I'm being courted by Airwalk because Airwalk makes outerwear, boots, and they're starting to do their snowboard program. So Airwalk wants me to ride head to toe for them going into the Olympics. They're throwing around big numbers.
And that lines up with you, right? Because you're a skateboarder?
Yeah, it was cool. I had a lot of really good friends that worked at Airwalk, and I loved their skate shoes, and they had a good skate team, and I was just pretty stoked on Airwalk for the most part. And then pretty shortly thereafter, I took that offer that they were going to give me to Morrow, and Morrow matched it, so I didn't have to go anywhere. That was great. I didn't have to leave or do anything new, but that was my first going into a negotiating with somebody. Because up until that point, it was basically just like, oh yeah, we want to pay you this much. Okay, cool.
No negotiations, you're going to get this?
Yeah, there wasn't a negotiation. It was like, we're going to give you this, and yay, here we go.
And what happens when you hear about the Olympics coming in? Because to tell you the truth, at least in my opinion, I think the Olympics are pretty lame at that point. But it's huge exposure. And what are your thoughts?
Well, there was just so much hype about it. There was so much hype about what the Olympics were and what they were going to do for snowboarding. And all these crazy statistics and numbers were being thrown around and how it's going to change the sport forever. And I listened to them, but I don't know how much I bought into that. It was just another chance for me to like compete on the biggest stage, just another giant competition. So there was definitely a lot of hype for sure. And for a brand looking at a marketing opportunity, the Olympics is probably one of the biggest ones you could ever have. You know, I think they thought that 98 was going to be a lot like 2002 was with Ross and Danny and JJ. I feel like that's what they thought the outcome was going to be in 98.
American domination.
Right. American domination, and also a great launch point for what we can do with snowboarding and how popular it is. And in all honesty, I think that, you know, maybe had I won that, maybe if it had been a sunny day, maybe if it had been better exposure for snowboarding, maybe that could have happened then. But it was just the way everything came together. The pouring rain, the 2 runs combined format, all these weird factors that were kind of working against snowboarding at that point didn't really let the magic happen like it happened in 2002 in Salt Lake City.
And the biggest year for you, I would say, is in 1997. It's the first year of the X Games. You have to be stoked because you've watched the X Games for the summer sports and you're into the summer sports, and then you get invited as a winter sport. And while ESPN is really selling these sports to the highest bidders, it seems like, you know, you've got your Yoo-Hoos and whoever's going to pay to be a part of these sports.
Yeah.
It is great to be in that spotlight, and you end up winning that one. And when you win the X Games, does that change the course of your career in life?
The X Games at that point, it was definitely big, but it didn't have the impact that it did 2 years after that, because that was the first winter X Games. It was definitely awesome to win that, but it still wasn't like winning the US Open. Like that year in 97, I won the US Open as well. And by no means would I even put the X Games on the same level as the US Open at that point.
Okay, but I would think that a lot more people heard your name from winning the X Games than the US Open. It's just the US Open is very important to snowboarding.
The X Games was televised live. We didn't have it with halfpipe. You know, the US Open would happen in April or March, and then you wouldn't see anything from the US Open until the following year when it would air on TV in like the fall.
Right.
Like, that's usually how it would go. So it was a lot different to have the X Games be broadcast live. That was a huge one. Super huge.
We talked about the Olympics a little bit. I'm not going to go into too much about it, but it sounds like the experience, it didn't really work out as you would have liked it. I think you made the final, but it would have been way cooler if I could say 2-time X Games gold medalist and Olympic gold medalist Todd Richards, but you still have 2 X Games gold medals, so that's pretty rad.
Yeah, I was stoked on it. I look back on the whole thing really fondly. You know, it'd be rad to say that you had a gold medal, but that season still was insane. The amount of stuff that happened that year.
The big talk in the snowboard world is Terje not wanting to be part of the Olympics, and selling the soul of the sport to a bunch of skiers is his take on it, although I'm speaking for him and I don't know him at all. And that's pretty much what happened. But did you hear any shit from anybody in the snowboard community for wanting to be part of the Olympics?
Not one. I didn't hear shit from anybody. The craziest part about it, I mean, look, Terje he's very opinionated about the Olympics, and there's a lot of things about the Olympics that I do not agree with as far as what the IOC does and what happens to countries afterwards and the corruption and all that stuff. But, you know, at the same time, Terje's biggest sponsor is providing Olympic uniforms. So don't shit where you eat. Like,
yeah, really.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the true irony of taking a stand like that, where you've got someone that's paying your bills and at the same time you're rallying against them. I don't know. It seems hypocritical.
That's amazing. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. And at that point in time, Burton had a lot of people, you know, Ross Powers, they got their cake and they could eat it too, because they had Ross Powers who got third and he was a Burton team rider, and they could claim him, but they could also claim fuck the Olympics and have the handcuff shirt come out. Yeah. They were marketing that whole thing perfectly. I still think it's a marketing stunt. I really do.
Well, it worked. I'm still talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So around 2001-ish, you finally have to make the move to leave Morrow, and I skipped a bunch of your career, but you know what? You remember it, and some other people can read about it, I'm sure. But you end up leaving Morrow, which I think is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But you end up going to Rossignol, which is strange to me, because Rossignol always seems to invest in a dream team of athletes, and they make amazing product, and nothing screams more skier than Rossignol, and they seem to never do anything with the team that they have. It's like they invest all this money, and you can look at their team over the years in different times and be like, that's the best team in snowboarding, but no one would know unless you actually went to their website and was like, holy shit, look how badass their team is.
Yeah. I mean, when I went to Rossi, it was kind of a weird decision for me because Morrow was my life at that point. I'd ridden for Morrow for over 10 years. My whole career was basically at Morrow. And so like leaving them to go to Rossignol, it was weird because number one, I had the same opinion of Rossignol. Like, look at this ski brand, like the super French ski brand. But then the people that were working at Rossignol at that point and their dream and what they wanted to do and their vision spoke to me. They were really trying to like unski Rossi and kind of make it more snowboardy. And their team was incredible. Like the people that were on the program were like, it was nuts. So I was down because of the talent that was going to surround us. And my years at Rossi were super fun. Those were some of the best boards I'd ever ridden in my life. As far as making snowboards, there wasn't many people making boards that were that good at that point. But yeah, you're right though. It's really hard to separate the French ski brand from the snowboard.
It's a lot easier to do it with a brand like K2. And I guess maybe that's the American part, but where K2 kind of separated it a little bit and tried to have different personalities, it just seemed like everything was Rossignol there. And they didn't market the team.
No.
The best athletes in the world, and you couldn't tell anybody about it.
There was a good advertising push for about a year and a half. Rossi was starting to do back covers and inside back covers of Snowboarder and Transworld, and Travis Rice is riding for them, and Hannah Beeman and myself and Dion De La Salle and JF Pelchat, like the team, Andrew Crawford, like we had a banging team and we were just starting to make an impact. We were just starting to get people to understand that, whoa, Rossi's kind of coming correct. Then the rug got pulled out from Rossi. And that was like right around the same time as Quicksilver bought Rossignol and all that crazy shit went down.
Well, I'll say we're kind of going to the tail end of your riding career. While you had been healthy for most of your career, I'm sure you had bumps and bruises like everybody else. You didn't really do anything terrible until you end up breaking your arm in about 2003. And when I say breaking your arm, people think, oh, he's just in a cast. But what you did to your arm is horrific. The x-rays are just disgusting. And what did you actually do?
I shattered my humerus where it went into the elbow joint. And I also shattered a piece of my elbow. So when you look at the x-rays, it basically looked like someone blew my elbow up with a grenade. It was like shattered pieces of bone everywhere. And it was not good. And the prognosis was not good. I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to use my hand ever again because it partially severed my radial and my ulnar nerve. I could close my hand, but I couldn't open my hand.
It's a good thing you're married.
Yeah, right? And then also, I almost lost my arm because of the amount of damage that was done. It was a lot more serious than I thought it was when I initially hurt myself.
When you hear a doctor tell you that you might not keep your arm, were you really scared?
I didn't hear that until I woke up from my blissful operation. It was so bad that I was morphined right away.
Okay.
As soon as the EMT, as soon as the EMT saw me, he was like, your arm, this is going to really hurt once your shock wears off. So they were like pumping me full of whatever they can pump me full of. So I didn't hear about it until after my operation. I was just sedated. I didn't freak out until the next day when the doctor came in after my 6-hour surgery and was like, hey, I just want to let you know that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if you're ever going to really be able to use your hand again. Basically, they give you the worst case scenario because they don't want to be on the hook.
Right.
Like if they give you a sunny prognosis or diagnosis. So that's how that shook out.
And the beauty of a podcast is we can fast forward through your recovery and you're already healed and you're totally better. Is this the time that you start thinking about what's next in my life? Because you probably are getting older and the arm has got to be a big concern anytime you do anything at that point. Is that when you start thinking about TV, or do people come to you and want to get you on TV?
Well, people came to me because I was scheduled to go and do the X Games that year. And this is in 2003. It happened in December of 2003, and January of 2004 was X Games. And I was basically like, okay, well, I got X Games, so I can't do that now. And then people from X Games were like, well, since you can't do that, why don't you just get in the booth and call the snowboarding with these guys? So I did, and it worked. And they were like, oh, okay, well, you want to do it again next year? I'm like, well, I'm not going to do pipe anymore because I'm bored of halfpipe. I want to do slopestyle, so I'll compete in slopestyle, but I'll commentate halfpipe. That's kind of where it began. If it wasn't for me shattering my humerus into a million pieces, then I would never have found a career of TV broadcast.
I would think it's easy for you because you have the vocabulary, you know the people, you know the mindset, and you just have to figure out the gear and get used to makeup. Was there a big learning curve for you?
Not really. The learning is still going. You know, there's certain words to stay away from and to make things sound like you're just talking to somebody, and it's a constant learning process. And I was just trying to be genuine. I was basically just calling it like it was. There was certain things I had to get over, like these crutch words that you would use that everyone has when they're just talking to somebody. They end up using
the and-us and gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to use less of those and trying to work your way and navigate your way around the English language to paint a picture for someone that has never seen snowboarding before.
What is the biggest fuck up you've had on live TV?
Shitting my pants. No.
Did that happen?
Well, I shit my pants in the start gate of a snowboard contest a long time ago.
That's got to be uncomfortable, gross, smelly. Did you win?
I think I got third. I got turd. You know, the funny thing is I can't remember really any super fuck ups on the broadcast. I mean, there's definitely been some really stressful times. For the most part, it's been pretty easy, but I always feel like I want to do better. I'm never satisfied with any broadcast by any means. I always feel like there's a lot of room for improvement.
And I would think from the time that you competed to today, the tricks have gotten absolutely crazy. I mean, it's borderline aerials. I mean, that's how I feel about it. But for you in the booth, it's totally different calling a switch 1080 than calling switch dub 1440. I mean, it's got to be a lot of math and craziness in your head at the booth. Do you have someone in your ear calling tricks, or are you doing it all yourself?
No, I do it all myself. And, you know, I'm basically, for the most part, recognizing shapes in the air, like speed of spin and which way do they land when they touch down. Usually that's all the information that my brain needs to know if it's a 1440 or a 1620. Sometimes I get it wrong. If I don't get the camera angle right on the takeoff and I don't know what footed a person is, it gets a little bit more challenging. But for the most part, I think I've become really good at figuring out what's happening in the air and how many 360s are equal a 1440 and, you know, that kind of thing. You are doing math, and that's why it's such a relief to commentate a skate event, because it's a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then when you're commentating on a thing like the X Games, and you being a video gamer, I believe you're a video gamer.
Sure.
When you go into a production meeting and ESPN tells you that they're going to have video games in the X Games and they are going to be X Games medalists, they're going to walk away with the same gold medal that you did.
Oh, God.
Does that piss you off? Because there's a talent to what those dudes are doing, and I think what they're doing is incredible. It's just like they don't belong at the X Games.
I have that theory too. And we noticed that the esports people are no longer at the X Games, but at the same time, the esports, they have their own things that get 3 times as many views as the X Games does on its best day.
Yep.
But my whole point to that, when I started some kind of weird beef with the freaking internet world, was that, look, there's a lot of people over the years that have maimed themselves, that are now paraplegic, or people that have even lost their lives at X Games in the pursuit of the gold medal. So if you want to keep the prestige of going home with X Games Gold to what it is, then there's no way that you can bring league gameplay into that. It's virtual. It's not real. There are no real consequences.
Did you get murdered on the internet by those gamers?
Yeah, you can get virtually murdered. But I think the people at ESPN did it for a cash grab.
For sure.
They were looking for money, and that was their way to get it. But it wasn't right, and they realized it, and they chopped it.
Good on them for that.
Yeah.
They got their money that one year.
And when that went down, I was very vocal on social media about how I didn't think that made any sense to me. I got a lot of hate from the competitive gaming world.
There's a lot more people that can push A, B, and a bunch of buttons than can drop in a vert ramp.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands to write hate on the internet as well. And they're way better at it because that's what they do.
Yeah.
I took a lot of flack for that. And this is coming from someone I've been like a lifelong video game nerd. Friggin' love it. Still do. I don't care how many hours I've put in on PS4 or Nintendo or whatever, friggin' ColecoVision back in the day.
Ladybug.
Yeah, exactly. Playing Ladybug. You will never convince me that anyone that plays video games for a living should sit in the Hall of Fame of real athletes. It just doesn't. It doesn't. It won't. And it's the same way that I think that chess is a game of the mind. Chess and league gameplay, I think, sit in the same category.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
You can be the best chess player in the world, but you're not sacrificing life and limb to become the best chess player.
There is no risk. It's just all mental and time.
Yes.
So we're getting towards the end. I'm going to touch on a few things that you did in your career that we're not going to go deep in. Around 2006, you start a snowboard brand, Omatic Snowboards. And probably not the best time in the world to start a snowboard brand, but you don't know the recession's coming and the whole world's about to shift gears on how they spend. But was there a hole in the market, and is that why you created Omatic?
Yeah, Omatic was created basically out of necessity for a lot of us too, because there wasn't a snowboard brand that myself in particular wanted to go and ride for. And I was kind of sick of doing things for other people, and I kind of wanted to give back a little bit. And snowboarding was and is becoming like a super rich kid sport. And that's not when I got into it. And if you're going to sustain a business model, you can't create an elitist sport. So we were like, okay, well, let's avoid all this hoopla and we will create a snowboard brand for everybody. And we did it, but a lot of brands and a lot of stores were too caught up with being cool, and they either blocked us or the shops didn't want it because they saw it as being cheap. But I mean, if you ask anyone that ever rode our boards, they were freaking amazing. They were really good snowboards, and they didn't cost $600.
Yeah.
It's one of those things we were kind of maybe came into the marketplace too early. I think maybe that idea was the precursor to a subscription-based brand,
Yeah, I could see that.
Maybe some of those ideas would have flushed out later, but we were just a little bit too early.
And then the next business I know about is St. Archer, and I think this one crushes it for you. On this show, everyone loves beer. Most people love 10 Barrel, but you started St. Archer with a bunch of action sports athletes, and that's when the microbrew thing is taking off, and eventually you guys are able to package that up and sell. Did you guys make a big chunk of change off of that?
Yeah, obviously some people made more money than others. It was amazing, and it took a lot of hard work by a lot of hardworking people. And next thing you know, Miller Coors is wanting to buy us. This was right after Ballast Point sold for $1 billion. So it was like pretty freaking big deal for us, for sure.
It's one of those offers you can't refuse.
Yeah. Basically, everyone made out like bandits. It was crazy.
Well, that's awesome. Well, now the next one, though, and I think there's some of the same players in it, is Villager. And And Villager it's like electrolyte enhanced or pH enhanced water. I'm not really sure what it is.
Well, it started as a coconut water brand, and it was like the anti-energy drink because you got Red Bull, Rockstar, and Monster, and they are not good for you. I don't care what anyone at those brands says.
They're good for kids though, right?
If you want diabetes, they're fucking great. So we wanted to create an alternative energy drink that would be backed by athletes the same way that these other big brands were, but at the same time be good for you. Originally, we jumped into the market with coconut water, and then subsequently, since then, we've done an alkaline water that does really well. We've done organic kids juice boxes that are crushing. Yeah, and we're in Target and freaking 7-Eleven and
oh wow,
all the places you would want to be. It's nice.
Do people tell you that they want your water to be in non-plastic bottles?
Yes, they do. And I had a huge problem with when we even did water. I was like, why? Like, how can you even compete in this marketplace when there's 50 different bottled water brands and it's all the same shit? It's still a tough one to not have glass bottles.
Yeah. But in the early stages of a brand, it's hard to invest the ton of money that it would take, I would think, for glass to make that happen.
Yeah, it really is. Still, there isn't really a lot of brands on the market. I think Salty is one of the biggest ones right now. You know, it's more of a West Coast centric, and they have glass bottles. And I know for a fact it costs a lot of money to do that. And like a lot of their investors in the beginning, they were like, we want to do all glass bottles. And the investors were like, you guys are crazy.
If you're in Target and 7-Eleven, that one seems to be working as well. So good investments that you've made.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, yeah. But at this point in the show, I have a segment I call Inappropriate Questions.
Okay.
I get somebody that you know to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. And I was late to the game in getting someone to record these because this podcast kind of happened really quick. But I talked to a guy that you have a podcast with, Chris Coté, and he came up with 3 questions for you. They're not that bad. I'm going to play the first one for you right now.
All right, go.
As an act, can you please explain what it is to be a jacuzzi Casanova?
What is a jacuzzi Casanova?
Yeah, he said as an act.
As an act? Oh, he means from the movie. Like, okay, so it's basically boning the air tube in a jacuzzi, the jet. That's what was being alluded to in Out Cold.
Okay. I had a jacuzzi growing up. I'm not going to say I'm familiar with that or I'm not familiar with that, and we'll leave it at that. We'll go to question number 2.
In terms of manscaping, Todd, could you please explain the levels, the depths that you go to be the completely hairless individual that you are from neck down?
So Chris had told me that he had seen you many times wearing nothing, and you have just the perfect skin everywhere, and he's just wanting to know what you do to make that happen.
I don't think Chris has ever seen me wearing nothing.
All right, fine. I made it up.
I definitely don't have a lot of hair. I was born a hairless ape. There's not a lot of manscaping that goes on. You know, you go for like the summer trim. You roll in there and you whack a few weeds, and that's about it. There's no hearts or any like crazy like stripes or anything.
Well, if you are going to do anything crazy, I would think a handlebar mustache right above your junk would be pretty awesome.
Maybe like make an elephant face.
That would be pretty good too. All right. So your final inappropriate question from Chris.
All right.
When and where were you when you did your first frontside in the air?
Nowhere. It was freaking nowhere because it never happened.
And this is one that you've talked about many of times. It's kind of semantics of terminology. You can't do a frontside indie because
they're inherently backside. Yeah, that's a point of contention. That's the uneducated youth of today's snowboarding deciding that they're too lazy to figure out what tricks are.
That is what it is, but your job is to educate people and let them know on air what's going on.
That's right. And I feel like I do. I try to do my best.
You do a great job, and you have lasted the test of time. I mean, there's a lot of snowboarders that have long careers, but they don't stay in the spotlight as long as you have, and they don't keep their authenticity as well as you have, I feel like. Whether it's on your skateboard, on the hill, or behind the microphone, it's always a treat to hear from Todd Richards, and that's why I was psyched to have you on the show.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It's always good to talk story with people. It's fun.
So that was time with Todd Richards, and that dude seems to have figured things out. While a lot of other athletes need to put their lives back together after a long career of minimal money in action sports, that was not Todd. He got paid during his career, he made some great investments, and on top of that, he found a job where he does everything that the pro athletes have to do, minus the putting your life on the line. He's a smart guy, and he's the best at what he does in the landscape of action sports broadcasting. All while being a pretty cool dude. That's the show for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on, and support my great sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.